imagine more stories that soar, business, life, and so much more. Laughs, lessons, and local delight. It's the podcast that feels just right. It's the Imagine More podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Imagine More podcast, where we shine a light on the people, businesses, and ideas shaping our community right here in Moore County and beyond. I'm your host, Rose Young, and today's episode feels especially important because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and yet, if we're honest, mental health isn't something we should only talk about once a month out of the year. It's something that touches every single one of us, quietly, consistently, and sometimes when we least expect it. Now, here's the interesting part. Today's guest has spent years in the emergency room, where physical emergencies walk through the door every day. But often, what's underneath those moments isn't just physical. It's stress, it's burnout, it's anxiety, it's life. So today we're going to have a real conversation about mental health, not in a clinical way, but in a way that fits into our everyday lives. Dr. Leake, welcome to the Imagine More podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad you're here because I think this is one of those conversations people don't even realize they need until they hear it. Let's start with you. What first led you into medicine?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I had some experiences around mental health, growing up, going through some therapy myself as a teenager, like many teenagers need, right?
Right.
And, just found it kind of really interesting about how we could talk about the mind and, things that we were struggling with and see changes happen in our life and going through that. And so I got really interested in how our brain works, how our mind works, and ended up actually majoring in psychology in undergraduate and then went to medical school to actually become a psychiatrist. But once I got into medical school and started spending some time, I saw that the field of psychiatry could be really frustrating. I saw a lot of people live with lifelong suffering. A lot of the medicines are really hard to take. They can cause, severe side effects. They can cause people really, a lot of struggles. And so then I ended up in the emergency department, which was, hey, I see somebody sick. I can make them feel better quickly. I can make quick changes, quick diagnoses. And I got kind of drawn into emergency medicine, but kind of always kept this passion for brain science and the mind and how that works and, how our behavior is related to what's going on in our nervous system.
Right.
And so after a long time in the emergency department, kind of slowly found my way back to this work that we're doing now.
Okay. Well, was there a moment early on where you realized this was more than just a career, that it was something deeper for you?
Yeah, I think, to be able to be pulled into medicine, you have to have a little bit of that feeling. It's most people end up in medicine. It's this interesting balance of that we're kind of nerds, like we like science and we like, solving problems. But at the same time, it has to have a relational component, I think, to be good at it and to really kind of follow through with all the work and time it takes, to get there. And so, you have to kind of care about people and want to be improving people's lives and making a difference, but also be a little bit of a nerd, I guess.
I totally agree about the part where it has to be human because, in order for me to tell you all the things going on with me, I'm going to have to trust you, right?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the neat things that's overlap between emergency medicine and the work that I'm doing now in mental health is that, you have to be able to get to know people pretty quickly and build this rapport relationship with people. In the emergency department, that happens fast. If you come and see me with an injury, like I have minutes to get you to kind of trust me and to feel like, hey, it's, Dr. Leake's going to take good care of me and help me, in this moment. And so I think we see that in mental health too. It's, being able to kind of slow down, take that time to connect as humans so that we can do the work together of kind of starting a journey towards healing.
That's right. I see your connection between being a little bit of a nerd because you have to know all the science, you have to know what you're looking for, and then the human part as well. So do you have any memorable story that you might want to share that from the emergency room that really touched you and stayed with you till today?
Yeah, I think that, what's interesting in the emergency department, when you think quickly back to stories, often it's the things that were most dramatic, right? The injuries that you didn't expect or the tragedies, that happen. But I think that, I'm always kind of taken back to, the stories of, parents come in with a sick or injured child and, that there really kind of quickly becomes two patients because you're taking care of the child in front of you, but also, trying to support the parent and the mom, their particular
Who's panicking, probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think of, just severe accidental injuries, I guess one emotionally that sticks out for me is, seeing a child that was accidentally shot and harmed, by a parent's weapon. And, we hear about these tragedies and the risk of them. And I felt like that was really something that was difficult to carry because, the parent obviously, feels horrible that this has happened and, is kind of rethinking, maybe decisions that they've made, that could have led to this. But then we're also obviously trying to take care of the child and also, support the parent through that. Yeah, so I think that, those kind of things were just always reminders. I always told parents in those types of settings, that it's a time to go back and think about how your house is set up and, the safety around the medicines and the firearms and those things in your home and, just kind of realize the risk of all those sort of things.
Oh, yeah. Because we do hear about that, but we don't ever have to actually experience it like you did.
Yeah.
So I can see how you held that with you. Yeah. What is it like to be in the emergency room day to day to day?
Yeah. It's interesting, that the emergency department really is a safety net for the healthcare system in the United States. We have a lot of good things about our healthcare system. I think we really do have some of the best physicians and doctors and nurses in the world and some of the most advanced medicine in the world. But we also have a really big access problem in this country. It's really hard for people to get primary care and to get, basic health care. And so those consequences show up in the emergency department in a lot of different ways. One is that I end up, I think people are always surprised that I end up spending a lot of my day caring for things that people wouldn't necessarily think of as emergencies, right? So I may see a fair amount of, stuffy noses and back pain and, my tummy hurts, in a day in the emergency department. And it's just that sometimes we get frustrated with that, because we're like, hey, we're here for real emergencies. But then I have to kind of realize that people don't always have access to primary care or to other options. And so they may just kind of end up where they know they can get taken care of. So we see a mix of that. And then we see, a mixture of when healthcare has failed, so people haven't been able to have good care. So their diabetes is out of, control. Maybe it's caused harm to where they have severe infections. And so we see emergencies from that. And then obviously, we see the traumas, that happen and, severe illness, heart attacks, appendicitis and surgical emergencies. So I think what's a lot of people probably don't realize in the emergency department is that, we're kind of quickly going from thing to thing, right? And so in one room, I might see somebody that's severely injured, and then I'm having to go talk to someone who has a cold, right? And they're frustrated that they've been waiting, and it's, why is this taking so long? But maybe they don't realize, what else is going on, right? Yeah.
So when you're talking about the emergency room, and how many years did you spend in the emergency room?
Yeah, so I was full-time in the emergency department for 13 years, worked in a trauma center, so really, busy department. It was fairly rural and in Shelby, North Carolina, so kind of this rural area between Charlotte and Nashville. And so, quite a variety of care. And then I still do part-time emergency department, so I do a few shifts a month.
Do you? Well, here's my question to you then. How did you take care, or how do you take care of your mental health?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, and I think that it's something that's lacking in medical education. I think that, particularly in, these fields where we take care of very, very sick people, I don't think that we spend much time teaching nurses, physicians, and caregivers to how to take care of themselves. One of the things that I found was really helpful in my emergency medicine career is that when we did have severe cases, somebody taught me once to kind of hold a little powwow immediately after and kind of check in with everybody.
Okay.
And I think those were powerful moments, to kind of get the group together and be like, hey, we all went through something together, maybe this was a bad outcome, maybe someone didn't make it, or, maybe they did, but it still was really stressful and, an emotional moment. And so being able to kind of sit down and pause for a moment, I think connect as humans and support each other is really, really important.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I think that makes a big difference and gives it, a chance for our nervous system to reset, how do we kind of calm ourselves? So I think that that's been important. And then, I think also for me, spending time with family, travel has been really important. And I think, being able to kind of get away and see different parts of the world and kind of, again, I love traveling. I love connecting with humans and kind of seeing how they live life a little bit differently or, how they see things a little bit differently. So I think those have been important resets for me too.
It really really opens your mind, doesn't it, when
It
you
does.
travel to a different country?
Yeah. Just to see, and I mean, particularly you've seen a lot of other countries how people move a little slower, their lives are a little bit slower.
That's right.
So maybe trying to kind of learn from that and adopt some of
I
those things into
agree.
our life, right?
We lived in Germany and everything was closed on Sunday.
Yeah.
And at first, it was such a pain. Oh my gosh, it's Sunday. I got to work Monday through Friday. How am I going to get all this done? And then I began to love it and think, okay, well, it's Sunday. It's my day off. I don't do anything on Sunday. It was really
So
nice.
guess what? We're forced to slow down a little bit. We're forced to take
Forced
some
to slow
time.
down.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, did you ever have any situations where someone came into the ER and it wasn't physical that you had to take care of? It was a mental health issue.
Yeah. So this shows up in so many ways.
Yeah.
I think that, one of the greatest breakthroughs I think in mental health in the last 20 years is to start to understand our understanding of the nervous system more and to kind of understand how so much of mental health relies on the nervous system, that's the brain and the peripheral nerves and how, they regulate the body. And so I think on one hand, we're realizing more about how mental health shows up in the body, right? And so,
Right.
people often show up in the ER thinking that they're having a heart attack and maybe it's really stress or anxiety related.
Yes, okay.
We know that chronic pain can be, deeply enmeshed with depression and other mental health.
Yes.
But then also, again, the emergency department being the safety net, we see a lot of mental health emergencies that have nowhere else to go. And so, when people are suicidal, psychotic, or overwhelmed or really at their wits' end for mental health, they often end up in the emergency department. And it's often frustrating for the physicians and nurses there because we don't have great answers. There's not a
Right.
quick path to get someone the mental health that they need. And so sometimes people will spend days and even weeks in the emergency department waiting for a psychiatric bed or for psychiatric care.
Oh my goodness.
So it can be really frustrating, and
Yeah.
hard work. And so it's been, I think an exciting part of my transition to kind of getting more involved in mental health to kind of find ways that we can actually help people, instead of just kind of saying like, oh, I'm sorry, you're feeling bad here. You're going to sit in this room in the ER, or sometimes even a hallway bed for weeks,
How's that going to help? Right.
Yeah, it's not. And it's going to
No.
make things worse.
Yes, just the tension and the anxiety of being there alone. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So, do you think that the urgent care has helped any at all ease up the emergency room?
I think in some ways, I think it has. I think that, people have started to have a better understanding of like, oh, this is a more minor problem that I can go from
Right.
this emergent care. But, I think urgent care can't always handle everything, obviously. And, sometimes people have to have certain insurance covers to be able
That's
to
true.
even see urgent care. And that's, with emergency medicine. And we have this EMTALA, which is this rule that everybody has to be taken care of, if they come to the emergency department, kind of regardless of their ability to pay.
Oh, okay.
And so I think that, it's it's a safety net where everybody can show up, right? And so people
Right.
end up using it for primary care because they don't really have other options.
Well, so since it's May and it's Mental Health Month, let's talk about something I think a lot of people don't fully understand. We hear the term mental health. You've said it since you've
Yeah.
been here all the time, but you talk about mental health hygiene.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think that, we learn in like middle school, maybe, or a little bit earlier, how to take care of our normal hygiene, right? Like how do we brush our teeth and take care of our skin? I don't know, right? Yeah. We're supposed to, learn these things and learn these ways to take care of our body. But we don't maybe learn as much about how to check in with ourselves and take care of our own, mental health. And so
Wow.
I think it starts with just that, kind of taking a few moments in the morning, as you're kind of waking up, before you're getting on your phone and scrolling or, kind of getting into your routines,
Yeah.
to just take a breath and kind of take a self-inventory of, how am I feeling? What do I notice about my nervous system, my body? Do I notice that I'm feeling anxious,
Mhm.
overwhelmed, depressed, or am I feeling pretty good and pretty optimistic about the day?
Right.
And then you can use that check-in to kind of dive into some resets. Like if you wake up and you notice that you're feeling anxious, maybe you know that you have some stressful things ahead for the day.
Yes.
Can you take a moment to take a few breaths, for yourself? Can you, take a moment to do some yoga or some meditation, maybe if you feel, open to those things, to journal a little
Right.
bit,
Okay.
maybe to speak with someone that, and trust, about what you're working on, what you're struggling with. And then, I think mindfulness is a word that's come up recently that can be really, really
Mindfulness
helpful.
is a very big word right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so a lot of people, don't know exactly what that is, but I mean, I think it's just being a little more thoughtful about the actions as you go through the day. And so again, kind of morning routine, as you're brushing your teeth, maybe instead of just being on autopilot and worrying about the day, taking some time while you're brushing your teeth to think about how do I really feel and what am I noticing about the sensations as I get ready in the morning? How does water feel on my skin as I'm bathing? And, some of those things may seem a little silly, but what they're doing is they're allowing you to connect with your body a little bit more. And so then you're kind of tuning into your nervous system and checking in with your body of how am I feeling? How am I doing? And that even just that act of checking in on yourself allows your nervous system to start to regulate and kind of, rebalance.
Interesting. Yeah. And it also, I mean, if I'm thinking, how does this water feel? Or I'm brushing my teeth and what is this flavor? I'm not thinking, oh no, I gotta.
Yeah.
So it kind of calms my brain to do that.
Yeah. Pulls us into here and now instead of like, always kind of thinking what's ahead or what's coming. And it just gives us time to kind of calm a little bit. Yeah.
Why do you think mental health is something we should be paying attention to every single day?
I think for a long time, there was kind of this stigma of like that there was weakness associated with mental health. And, people were we had this mentality of like, oh, just push through it. Come on, you've got this, like, get through. Right. But I think that we've really found that like by paying attention to it, you can actually affect it, right? And so I think that that's the calling is like, to kind of check in with yourself, check in with your friends. And by doing that, you can actually affect your own mental health or affect the mental health of those around you. And so, paying a little more attention to it, being a little more open, to thinking about it and talking about it and checking with your friends about it, having real conversations with your friends about how you're feeling and what you're doing. It's not just, how are you doing? Oh, I'm okay. It's like, hey, actually, thanks for asking, right? Thanks for asking. I'm struggling with a few things. Is it okay if we talk about that for a minute, right? And I think that those conversations allow us to better care for each other and relate to each other.
Right. So I hear you saying over several times, check in with your friends, communicate with people that you know and love.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit why that helps us.
Yeah, I think that, we are in this loneliness epidemic, and there's really been some studies on this where, we've moved towards isolation and we think that a quick text or liking someone's photo on Instagram is the same as communicating with them. And it's not. We're relational people, and a long, long time ago in kind of the development of culture and, evolution, we began to work together, as humans to be able to kind of create these more complex societies and rely on each other. And I think our biology has gotten to the point where, that syncing with others and really spending time with others is important to our own health. And now we're kind of getting this phase where we're separating, from each other and we're not spending as much time. Right. Yeah. And, even to the point where in some ways we've gotten to see, each other as dangerous or, enemies. And that's happened on a political basis. COVID has done some of that as well. Of kind of, that was the first time we were really afraid of other people. Maybe they could make me infected and sick. And, the truth is that our neurology and our bodies still kind of, need that connection. And it's been shown in science that like, as we're spending time together and communicating, our breath syncs up, our heart rates, slow together, our kind of nervous systems start to sync each other. Yeah. And so we just know that relationship is really, really important and connecting with others, face to face as much as possible is just really, really important.
I just saw, and I don't know, it was probably somewhere silly like TikTok, but that people need 4 hugs a day, 4 human contact with another person a day. Do you think that's something for real?
I think it is. I mean, we know that touch and, embrace is certainly one of the highest points of touch, right, that we can have.
Right.
And again, we know that it's affecting the nervous system that can really have long-lasting effects.
Yeah. So how do I know a sign for myself or maybe a friend that's communicating with me that their mental health might need some attention, but they're still functioning day to day?
Yeah. So, this can start a lot with like that basic of hygiene, so if you're checking in with yourself frequently, then you'll start to notice those more subtle changes, right? Okay. Maybe like if you're flossing your teeth every day, right, you're going to notice that like, oh, that kind of hurts when it normally doesn't, right? So you're kind of more in tune with your body and so more in tune with yourself and nervous system, so you can notice those shifts. But I think that if it's more about noticing a trend or something that's sticking, right? So if you feel bad for a day, you take some breaths, you take a walk outside, you spend time with a friend, you feel better, that's okay. That's a very normal normal process.
Right.
But if you notice that your nervous system and your mood is not responding to taking care of yourself or connecting with others, that you're starting to feel more depressed, more anxious, more withdrawn in spite of that, then that could be a sign that something's really going on and can be a good time to reach out for help. With your friends, if you notice that a friend that normally you were communicating with a lot is starting to withdraw, that they're not responding to you, as in the way that they would normally,
Right.
then, instead of just letting that happen, that could be a time to lean in and really kind of say like, hey, I'm really noticing that, haven't been able to spend as much time together and not talking as much. Can we get together for lunch, or could we spend a little time together? Or can I pop by and, drop off something for you, right? And then just kind of really taking that time to check in and make sure that they're doing okay. And giving them that permission, that like, hey, I'm here. Like, I really would love to hear about what you're struggling with or what you're thinking about right now.
Oh, yeah. So why do you think so many people ignore these signs and ignore their mental health?
I think, one is that there has been stigma around it. So, people haven't felt as open with talking about that and bringing it up. It's easy to say, oh, I hurt my ankle. Let's talk about that. But it's a little harder to be like, man, I really noticed I'm struggling with some anxiety and I don't know what to do with that.
That's true.
But I think that, maybe we're getting a little more open about that, which is good. But I think, the other is that we just don't quite know how to address it or how to think about it or how to talk, with others about it.
Yeah.
And maybe we haven't known how to check in with ourselves as much. We kind of get in this mindset of just like, we're busy. I'm going to keep pushing forward. I'll ignore it, just like you might ignore a hurt back. Like, I'm going to keep going and just pop some Tylenol and keep going. I think that, we find ways that are maybe not adaptive to ignore it. Like maybe we drink too much or we use other substances. So I think, taking the time to kind of tune in and check in with ourselves and try not to mask those symptoms, but to kind of like pay attention when our nervous system's screaming at us, just like we would if, your belly was hurting or your chest was hurting.
Right. And what do you think about the telephone? Because I know that our society is so connected to their phone. The minute you get up in the morning, what do? First thing, get your phone.
Yeah.
Right before you go to bed, oh, let me check, and then put the phone away. Tell me how that is affecting our mental health.
Yeah, I think, we're getting more and more research that it's not good for us, And
yeah.
And it's frustrating because it's so addictive and it's so, it feels like it's a great way to connect with others because you're like, in 10 minutes, I can see what, my 20 closest friends are doing, right? But it's not really connecting to them. It's just kind of this snapshot of what they've posted, and it may not even be representative of really where they're at or what they're going through.
No.
And so I think that while initially it maybe felt like it was more connection, it's actually led us to have less connection with others.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that we carry this thing around that we call a phone that's supposed to be good at phone calls. And it really kind of stinks at that part, I feel like. Like it's harder to get voicemails, it's harder to connect with others. But I think that using it for that, to kind of, I saw someone recently was running, a post about like, if you have time to scroll, you have time to make a phone call. And I was like, that's kind of an interesting approach of like, hey, before I do just scroll on Instagram, maybe I can call my grandmother up or I can, call my friend and check in.
Did you hear that? Call your grandmother.
Right? Or, I can check in with dad and see what he's doing today. And so I think that shifting that focus a little bit of like, hey, let me not get sucked into my phone where it's one way and actually let me use this phone as a phone and call and connect with someone could be beneficial.
Are you worried all about our teenagers and our young folks who are growing up this way?
Yeah, it's, interesting. There's a little bit of this generational shift that's happening that I'm noticing too, where parents that are in their mid-30s and have young kids, that the technology is a little bit new. It was new for like, that generation. And so we're kind of like, oh yeah, cool, play on the tablet. That's fine. But we're seeing the younger parents, that are in their late 20s are being much stricter about it. They're kind of like, hey, like, let's have really limited tablet time, or maybe we're not getting a phone until we're really in teenage years. So I think that's exciting to see. And I hope that it's a trend that sticks because I think the research is really powerful that like, particularly for our teenagers, this is relating to a lot of mental health concerns. We're seeing an increasing in eating disorders. We're seeing increased, suicidal ideation and depression. And, it makes sense, right? I mean, we're seeing, all this stuff blasted in our face, from the Instagram or from scrolling, and it's like, it's just overwhelming, right? And, you're developing your brain and nervous system and to be kind of overwhelmed with that content. Bullying has been taken to a new level through social media, which is really harmful too.
Well, so, it's hard for me as an adult to walk away from these sponsored ads. And the minute, you look at something, well, then you get 14 other ones coming right in.
Right.
And then before you know it, oh, it's a normal thing that I see this. Oh, I might want it, know?
Yeah.
And it's just because I see it all the time.
Right. Right.
So I can imagine a teenager and their young brains, having to do that all the time.
Yeah, I think they've really figured out, how to appeal to our nervous system and, the addictive parts of it. And so we just have to be aware of that and really try to see it as a tool and use it for that and not let it kind of, I think, take over, right?
Right. So, Dr. Leake, I'm going to have to take a short break here because I would like to highlight one of our nonprofits in the area. But this is such an important conversation. If this is resonating with you or maybe even reminding you of someone you care about, they might need to hear it. This is a great episode to share. So let's take a quick moment to highlight one of our Moore County nonprofit organizations and give you a moment to share this podcast. Hey friends, it's Rose with your weekly dose of doing good, and I'm eating blueberries. The Kiwanis Club of Sandhills is busy making a difference all across Moore County, reading to the children, funding scholarships, supporting youth programs, and helping build playgrounds for children with special needs. Pretty amazing for a group that also knows how to have a good lunch together. And speaking of good things, blueberry season is here. We are now selling freshly picked North Carolina blueberries for just $36 a flat. That's only $3 a pint. You can't beat that. Perfect for snacking, cobblers, muffins, smoothies, and freezing for later. Orders must be placed by June 1st, so don't wait. The website link is in the podcast description. Just send us an email and we'll get you all set up. And if you'd like to learn more about Kiwanis, come join us for lunch every other Wednesday at Table on the Green from 11:45 till 1 o'clock. Come for the food, stay for the friendship, and help us change the world one child and one community at a time. Let's make this practical for our community. For someone listening right now, busy life, full schedule, responsibilities, I know you gave us a few simple ways in the morning that you wake up. Will you expand a little bit about that? How can we start taking care of our mental health?
Yeah, I think, one of the easiest things to do this time of year is to get outside.
Okay. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, but I think being outside, being in the sun, experiencing nature, there's just so much, healing in that, but it also can be a moment to slow down and check in for yourself again. And it can be a great way to connect with a friend. What better way than, going for a walk with a friend or, spending a few minutes outside having, coffee or tea or something, with their friends and connecting. So I think that, if you wanted an easy recipe, and it's probably easier said than done. But, I think number one is to check in with yourself and noticing how am I feeling in my body? How's my body feeling?
Right.
How am I feeling mentally? Like, do I feel positive? Do I feel negative? Do I feel stressed? Do I feel anxious? Am I noticing sensations in my body that are dealing with that? And, the next way I think is then to check in with a friend, just making that something that you're doing, at least once or twice a week. We're really, really busy and I know we all are, but I think that, taking that little bit of time to just reach out and check in with someone,
Right.
it's good for us when we check in with others. It makes us feel good, right?
That's true. That's true.
And it's really good for our mental health as well as our friends. So, I think just, again, checking in on yourself and checking in on others can be a great way to do that. And if you notice that you're struggling, you notice something's going on, don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, one of the joys of coming to this community in Pinehurst and Moore County is there's just so many wonderful therapists and, such a wonderful mental health community here.
Is it?
I've been really amazed at the level and quality of therapists and psychiatrists, that are here. And so I think, don't hesitate to reach out and connect with one and find one that, works well for you if you feel like you need a little extra help.
Right. So how do we know, Dr. Leake? How do we know I've got this to I need help?
Yeah. I think it's looking for trends, and so if, you feel bad for a day or two, but notice things are getting better, or you're able to connect with a friend or loved one, or go for a walk, or spend some time outside, or take a little vacation, and you notice that things are feeling better,
Okay.
and that trend is headed in the right direction, then that's okay. That sounds good.
Okay.
But if you notice that in spite of those little tricks that you use, and in spite of connecting with others, that you're continuing to feel worse or not getting better, then that's a sign that you need some help, and it's okay to ask for help in that, state.
To ask for help.
Yeah. And so I think really, that can start with a friend, but if that doesn't feel like enough, then, reaching out to, a local therapist, if you're involved in church, often, someone in the church maybe can, be helpful to you, but other, trusted confidants, I think can be really, really helpful to, start to reach out. And, just like you would with medicine, like, don't be afraid to escalate it. If you reach out to one person and feel like, hey, that didn't really help, like, try someone else, try a psychiatrist, try a psychologist. But I think that, just not being afraid to really kind of stick with it. And we do that with our medical problems, right? Like, if you have stomach problem, you go see a doctor and they don't seem to give you a good answer. What do? You go see someone else, you ask to see a specialist. Right. Yeah. So we're willing to push for our medical side, but and it's hard because you're feeling bad, but it's like, I think the same with mental health. If you notice that you're struggling and it's not getting better, or you notice that a loved one is struggling and it's not getting better, then, reach out and keep kind of, pushing until you find the right person that can help you.
Sure. Have you noticed that the stigma towards mental health is going away? It's easing up, or what have you noticed about that?
Yeah, I feel like in our conversations with patients that people feel much more confident and comfortable talking about it now than, maybe we did even 10 years ago. And to me, it feels like a lot of that confidence has come around the understanding of the nervous system, and that, our nervous system plays such a role in mental health. I think, for a while, there's maybe some sort of thought of like that there was a certain, weakness involved, or this is something you did wrong if you feel bad.
Well, you're crazy.
Right. Yeah. Like, oh, wow, I'm just being weak. I should really just shake this off and move forward. Right. But I think our understanding now is that, like, no, this is showing up in the brain. If I do a brain scan on you, you're having depression, anxiety,
you can see that.
It shows in the waves of the brain and, how the brain is responding to stimulus. It shows in the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of the nervous system that regulates our heart rate, our breathing, our gut, and maybe why this shows up as chest tightness or shortness of breath or belly pain. But I think as we have more of an understanding of like the autonomic nervous system, the brain, and how mental health shows up, that's help people understand that, like, hey, this is like shifts in the nervous system, the brain, the neurochemistry.
It's real.
Yeah, and it's real. And I think it's helped us have, more open conversations about it, and helped people understand it, I think, in some ways too, of like, oh, that's why I feel that way. Oh, that's why when I feel sad, my stomach also hurts, when my chest gets tight.
Oh, and that's very helpful. I mean, if you can kind of understand it a little bit, it takes some of the fear away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about what you're doing now at Derive Health and your mission behind building a clinic centered on connection, dignity, and hope.
Yeah. So, what was interesting is I was kind of working in the emergency department, and about, always kind of keeping this passion for brain science and mental health. And about 10 years ago now, the research started coming out about ketamine and ketamine therapy.
Yeah.
And so, we use ketamine a lot in the emergency department to put people to sleep for procedures. And so, felt comfortable with it. But, really, this research was coming out that we found that giving people a low dose of ketamine as an infusion was helping tremendously with depression and PTSD.
Oh.
And we were seeing that as much as 70 or 80% of people with treatment-resistant depression were responding to these infusions with improvement in their symptoms.
That highest percentage rate. Wow.
And these are people who had suffered for a long time, right? This isn't somebody who just felt depressed for a few days. These are people who had failed multiple medications and, had really tried everything.
Yeah.
And so, I felt comfortable with the medicine, and so we opened this beautiful clinic to kind of be able to focus on, helping people with mental health through ketamine infusions.
Yeah.
So what we quickly found in that work is that it was just a very relational, practice that, certainly ketamine works. You give people ketamine infusion and they feel better, but there's just so much more to it. It's about some of the things that come up for them around the infusion, kind of being able to have perspective shifts and being able to be supported through that kind of journey of healing.
Right.
And so, as we opened Derive Health and kind of, developed our protocols, we found there was other research about, psychedelic therapy and some of the work that's going on with other psychedelics, psilocybin, MDMA. And really in that research, it shows that the more we take care of people around those medicines, the more therapy that's given to them, the more they kind of are, taught of how to work with the medicine, the better they do and the better long-term results they have.
Yeah.
And so we really brought that into our work in Reef Health. And, so we work in a relational way. And what that means is that I'm connecting with you as a human. This isn't about just coming and getting an IV infusion. It's about, kind of truly understanding what you're struggling with, what you've tried so far, where
Right.
you're at in your journey and being part of your healing journey. And so ketamine does this amazing thing of kind of like opening neural pathways and allowing, the brain to rewire and the nervous system to reset. But it's using that to kind of be able to heal. And so we do that through kind of supporting clients and, understanding where their challenges are and how they can integrate these changes into their life and kind of get perspective changes.
Right.
And so we opened here in Pinehurst 3 months ago to kind of be able to bring some of that care here as well.
Why? Why Pinehurst?
Yeah. So, it started with, we've been in Charlotte, for years, doing this care and have seen amazing results. And so we actually have started working with some therapists and doing some trainings and training therapists how to work, with ketamine and, with psychedelic medicine that'll hopefully become, more available in the future. And so we actually met an amazing therapist, Ashley Harris, who has worked here in this community for many years. She's very active in the Special Forces community and actually takes care of a lot of Special Forces and veterans. And so she did some training with us on ketamine and ketamine therapy and, really highlighted that there was a huge need in this community that, there's veterans here that are really in need. And we saw that there was, kind of a hole in ketamine therapy and psychedelic therapy in this part of the state, that there was really, stuff here and then stuff on the coast, but not really, stuff in Charlotte and stuff on the coast, but not really care in the mid-state.
Right.
And so, we decided to come out here and kind of like evaluate, the location. And so we just really agreed, that there was a big need. And so we opened up and have been able to partner with some of the veteran organizations. And the response has just been amazing. I mean, we've been able to take care of just so many beautiful people already, both veterans and non-veterans and family of veterans, and have just seen amazing responses already of just people having transformation already, which has been
Wow.
really, really exciting.
So I know that you're partnering with the Task Force Dagger and Vet Solutions. Tell us how these partnerships work and how it's really connecting you with the people.
Yeah, so both Vet Solutions and Task Force Dagger, really have this commitment to helping our veterans, with mental health. And, there's a really sobering statistic, I think, and that is that 4 times as many veterans have died from suicide as they have died from battle since 9/11.
Wow.
And so it's, something roughly like 32,000 veterans have died by suicide since
Like breaks your
9/11.
heart.
Yeah. And, and so this is where, veterans are dying every day from suicide, and so it's really an emergency. And, we have these tools now with ketamine therapy and, hopefully with further psychedelics becoming available soon to really stop that. We're seeing again that 70 or 80% of, veterans no longer meet criteria for PTSD after going through these treatments.
Really?
And so it's just a really powerful, to have something available. And so, one of the biggest problems is cost. Insurance doesn't cover these treatments. And so Task Force Dagger and Vet Solutions have really been able to put together funding to, pay for veterans to get care.
Yes.
And so, often they were having to send veterans overseas or to Mexico to get some of these treatments because they weren't available here in the US. But now with ketamine therapy being available and being here, they're able to kind of, refer clients directly to us. And so, it's been amazing that it's been quite a mission because we saw that they had such a backlog of people that needed help. So we're really trying to move quickly to get those clients in and get them the help that they need. But it's just these are both beautiful organizations that, really, again, see this in a relational way. They know that these veterans and their families have really suffered. And so they're really, working on kind of putting them in this really beautiful safety net, where we're taking care of them from start to finish, so it's getting them into the care, getting them the ketamine care, but then also really making sure that they're supported and have a safe place to land and kind of continuing that healing journey as well.
Did I hear you say that the ketamine therapy can cure PTSD?
Yeah. So we've seen, people basically go through ketamine therapy. Usually we do a series of 6 treatments over 7 weeks. So it's about once a week. And, really in the research, about 60 to 70% of, people who go through these treatments no longer meet criteria for PTSD after going through, the treatments. So just meaning that their symptoms have improved so much that they no longer, meet the criteria for PTSD. And, And, we've seen higher percentages in, our treatments. And I think, again, taking a really relational approach. But, what it's about is like, even, though we're saying 60, 70, 80%, almost everybody feels better, right? So even if they, still have ongoing symptoms, they still notice that there's significant improvements in their life, their capacity for stress, their capacity for their family. So, I would say that almost 100% of, people that go through, treatment with ketamine or, with other psychedelics as they become available are noticing that there's significant shifts in their life so that they're able to have improvement in their life and their quality of life,
Right.
even if they don't feel, quote unquote cured, right?
What about like bipolar and other mental health issues? Does this
Yeah.
also help with that?
Yeah, so the strongest results we've seen in the research around psychedelic therapy and ketamine therapy have been with treatment-resistant depression,
Okay.
anxiety, and PTSD
Okay.
have the strongest results. Now, we've started to see some results around OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder.
Okay.
There have been some research studies on bipolar, which have shown pretty promising, results as well. We see some clients with bipolar that have seen great improvement, which is great. And the other thing that I think is really exciting is chronic pain, particularly neuropathic pain.
Yeah.
Again, this goes back to this all being nervous system stuff.
Yes.
How do you experience pain? It's in your nerves and in your brain. And so people who suffer from chronic pain kind of get this imbalance in the nervous system again. And so we kind of noticed that, treating them with these medications seems to be really helpful as well.
Oh, well, so before we go on any farther, tell us, listeners, what is ketamine and what is the therapy? You said
Yeah.
that it's an infusion, but what is ketamine?
Yeah, so ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic, so a medicine that's often used to put people to sleep.
Okay.
It was actually discovered in the late 60s, early 70s. They were looking for an anesthetic that they could put people to sleep for brief procedures. And, at the time, all the medicines they used to put people to sleep made people stop breathing and, were really hard to work with. And so what they found with ketamine is that it was just extremely safe. It didn't make people stop breathing. It didn't slow down the heart rate like other anesthetics did. And so it's still used around the world today for putting people to sleep for procedures.
Okay.
And so it's actually on the World Health Organization essential medicines list, meaning that it always has to be produced, because it is used so frequently in ERs and operating rooms. And so a little bit by accident, it was found in the late 90s to have these antidepressant qualities. They were looking at people who were put to sleep for procedures and how they felt afterwards and what medicines they got. And people who got ketamine were like, woke up and they were like, hey, what'd you give me? I feel better. Like, I feel less depressed. I feel less anxious. Maybe my trauma feels a little better. And so people started doing research on this, and it's really amazing. There's now been over 400 studies looking at ketamine for mental health, and they've all pretty consistently shown a great safety profile and that, about 60 to 70% results, even as we've looked at the various ailments that we're trying to treat with it.
Right.
And so when we look at ketamine for mental health and what it's doing, there's been some really amazing brain science. And so, what we see is that first, it kind of works on glutamate receptors in the brain. That's a neurotransmitter like serotonin or norepinephrine that we maybe all know about.
Right.
But ketamine kind of binds to these glutamate receptors and blocks them. And so at high doses, that just kind of quiets the brain and puts it to sleep like we see in anesthesia.
Yes.
But at these lower doses in a slow infusion, what we find is it actually kind of rebalances the brain. And so if we scan the brain of someone with depression, PTSD, we find that there's parts of the brain that are actually overactive, and these are the part of the brain that maybe are causing rumination or that getting stuck in thoughts, worry, anxiety. And so ketamine kind of turns that part of the brain down, kind of relaxes that part of the brain.
Okay.
But then there's other parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, that help kind of regulate mood and emotion. And those parts of the brain are kind of actually underactive in depression, anxiety, and trauma. But ketamine kind of turns that part of the brain back on. And so what we see is this beautiful rebalancing, right? Where overactive parts of the brain are turned down and underactive parts of the brain are turned back up. And that happens really fast within hours of an infusion.
Wow.
And so people kind of immediately notice this little bit of lift, like, oh, I feel a little better. I feel a little less anxious. But initially after infusion or, with a single psychedelic treatment, we see that those effects kind of last a few days to maybe a week, but then kind of fade.
Yeah.
But we see with serial treatments, doing, several treatments as a series, that those effects last longer and longer. And the thought of why that happens is that ketamine also turns on neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to rewire itself or grow new connections.
Oh.
And so the way I think about this is that we're kind of rebalancing the brain with the glutamate response, and then we're kind of pouring fertilizer on the brain,
Yeah.
through this neuroplasticity, and that's allowing the brain to grow new connections and allowing those connections to stick. And that's where we think the long-term, healing from these medicines happens.
Okay.
And what's cool is with the research with other psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA that's going on, those medicines work on different neurotransmitters, but they all turn on neuroplasticity and they all cause kind of this psychedelic experience. And so we know there's something really to that. And so with ketamine, we do, in these infusions, we do get kind of this period of opening where people are having a little bit of a psychedelic or opened experience.
Yes.
And so we lean into that at Reeve. We'll use eye shades, kind of noise canceling headphones with music where people can kind of relax and kind of open their mind a little bit. And what we see from that is from people being in that little bit of altered state, they're able to get some perspective change, maybe see things a little bit differently. We call it often like thinking about thinking, and so you'll kind of get this awareness of like, oh, that's why I think about that way. That's kind of curious, and can kind of start to think about it a little differently.
Kind of outside looking in.
Yeah. Yeah. And, people often get to zoom out, kind of feeling like, oh, I could really zoom out and see life for what it really is and what's important and what's not. And then being able to have the support, our team is trained in psychedelic therapy and ketamine therapy and really experienced in it. We often have therapists involved in the care as well.
Yeah.
And so, being able to have that support to where, if something challenging does come up or, something interesting and curious comes up, that you're kind of have that support to be able to process it and think about it. And then what we call integration, which is, taking that little concept and really thinking about it and diving into it so that it can become more of a permanent change.
Right.
And so, that's how it all kind of comes together. We're kind of rebalancing these brain waves, rebalancing the nervous system, letting that nervous system settle, allowing for neuroplasticity, and then allowing these kind of innovative thoughts or interesting thoughts and perspective changes to happen. And then, over time, that can really lead to some beautiful healing and perspective changes.
Oh, the whole description sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should just try it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is. I mean, it's really interesting. One of the most common things that people report to us after they go through the infusions is just kind of like that. Oh, I just kind of feel like everybody needs to experience this. And I think it's just that ability to get out of ourselves or get out of our own way, in some way and kind of get that perspective change and see things a little differently. And there's a lot of ways to do it. We can do it through therapy. We can do it through meditation. We can do it through time in nature, right? To be able to get that shift and kind of see things a little bit differently. But sometimes if the nervous system's really stuck and really feeling imbalanced, then we need a little help. And, that's what I love about ketamine and psychedelic therapy is that it really opens a way to have this transformation. And I love that it's a thought, or the thought behind it is around healing and transformation. It's not about something that I want you to take every day for the rest of your life to kind of mask or shift symptoms,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you say that ketamine's been around for a long time, and we've been using it for different ways. Why do you suppose that the insurance isn't covering this therapy?
Yeah, it's, one of the problems with the way that just healthcare and pharmaceuticals work in our country is that, when something's off patent and, it's no longer, I guess, highly incentivized for it to be covered, it's just not. And so ketamine, because it has been around for so long, is off patent. Nobody owns the patent to it to be able to kind of pay for the research and FDA approval. Yeah. And it costs, dozens of millions of dollars to kind of get through the FDA approval process to be able to get something covered by insurance. There is Spravato, which is a ketamine nasal spray, which is approved by the FDA and is covered by insurance. We haven't seen the effective rates be quite as high as we see with IV ketamine, but certainly can be an option if, for some people to be able to go through that. And many psychiatrist offices are offering that. So, if money is a concern and you really want to try the insurance, route, then Spravato can be an option. That's an intranasal, ketamine that you could try. But if that doesn't work for you, I would say don't give up on the medicine or concept. That IV can be a more powerful way and a more functional way to do it. But, the other way to think about this is that it is, somewhat expensive. It costs about $400 in infusion. So, it's usually around $2,000 to $2,400 to go through this series of 6. But, I think people often think of it as like an investment in their health, and it's not something that you have to do forever, right? It's not that you have to spend $2,400 every 6 weeks to go through this. Once you've kind of invested in that, then, people do pretty well, and some people feel lifelong change. A lot of people need an occasional booster, but that could be something that you're doing once or twice a year. It's not something that you're having to pay for, monthly for the rest of your life.
Right.
So, in some ways, it often comes out cheaper than, therapy or medication or some expensive, medication that you have to take forever. And a lot of times, even people's insurance can end up, forking out $100 or $200 a month for their medications.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you can come off of those and, have something that's kind of healed your brain and nervous system, then it may save you money over time. Right?
Right. Well, and all the health issues that come with your mental health, the physical,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I can see how that would save you money. It actually doesn't seem that expensive when you think of it that way.
And people notice that, I think that they really notice that as their nervous system shifts and they're starting to feel better, they start to get more active and their health improves as well. I was just talking with a client this morning who, he started infusions and he was drinking heavily and he stopped drinking after his first infusion.
After his first one.
And, he had some intention of like, oh, I'd want to cut back, but he said that he just has zero interest in it, at this point. And that he's really just noticed it's not as much for him about like, do I want to drink or not? It's like that he's just had this shift in his perspective of like, no, I want to pursue health. I want to pursue wellness. And I'm really working on that. And so he's spending more time outdoors, more time being active. And he's just noticed that that's a shift that as he's feeling better mentally, he wants his body to kind of follow that. And so it's really kind of powerful to see that come up for someone. Yeah.
I could see your eyes start sparkling describing that. So our veterans, I know that we have a lot of veterans and first responders in this area that came with Fort Bragg, and then ended up staying or actually still in the military. Have you seen that there's a growing mental health need for that?
Yeah, I think the need has been there and been known, but I think that there's a greater awareness around it, And, what we're hearing, and I guess I'll give a quick plug. There's Waves of War is a documentary, so it's Waves and War.
Okay.
A documentary on Netflix that's out that's right now about veterans and the suffering, that they're going through, especially special forces.
Oh, gosh.
And some information about psychedelic therapy, that can be really interesting, but a beautiful documentary kind of highlighting this. But I think that it's, the awareness is coming. And particularly for, special forces, we had a shift after 9/11 where all of a sudden these guys are now being deployed, 8, 9, 10, 12 times, sometimes just back to back to back. And that had never really happened before. And so we kind of didn't know how to support them, how do we support their mental health? And these guys are tough, right? They're really, taught to kind of put their heads down and keep going in and keep going back. And it was showing up in their nervous systems and in their health. And I think no one really knew how to pay attention to it. And so unfortunately, I think it started showing in the crashes of, suicidality and hospitalizations and, huge mental health emergencies. And then it finally got, some attention. And the other has been, I think the attention on traumatic brain injury. We noticed that people were getting these micro brain injuries, through their deployments and how that was showing up. And so through some of this testing, we were realizing like, oh, wait, we also have pretty severe depression and PTSD and other things going on. And, I think that there's a lot of people have experienced childhood trauma and other things as well, right? And that all shows up, if you've had childhood trauma and then you're exposed to more trauma in the military, then, these things are additive and they show up in the nervous system. And so I think that we're having more awareness of the kind of, I guess, epidemic of it, nature and like, just how severe and how many people are affected. And now it's exciting that we're starting to have some attention to the tools that are out there, like, hey, there's specific types of therapy that work well for this. EMDR and, other types of therapy can be really helpful. And now understanding, ideas around ketamine and psychedelic therapy and how these are really a way to kind of help the nervous system and brain reset.
Yeah. Now, what about for when you were talking about the veteran or the military folks that are going and being deployed 8, 9, 10 times? What about the family that's left behind? I mean, do you ever have the family members come in and work with you on this?
So, I mean, one of the beautiful things that I think we're seeing happen is there's a huge awareness around that, that you can kind of treat the veteran and heal the veteran.
Yeah.
But if they don't have a safe place to land, then this can really be ongoing problems. And, often this trauma that the veteran's been through, the suffering that they've been through, the multiple deployments has this huge kind of ripple effect into the family and into their communities. And so it's hard for that to heal, as the veteran heals. And so, we do see a lot of spouses of veterans and, have been able to do ketamine therapy with them.
Good.
A lot of therapists that specialize in taking care of special forces also specialize in taking care of their families.
Good.
And so I think that's been really beautiful to see. There's a lot
Right.
more community development. Task Force Dagger and some of the other organizations that support veterans and special forces mental health have, started to put together more community and group organizations so that people can get together and have, maybe a weekend retreat where all the families can come together and hear about, what they're all going through and how to support each other.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah. So I think that working in that way has been really, really beautiful. And then we also, offer some couples support and couples therapy and couples infusions, even where people can go through this together.
Oh.
And really that highlights this ability
like
to connect
date
in a new way, right? Yeah. What an amazing date night, but a way to really connect on a super deep level, right?
What do you wish more people understood about mental health care today?
Yeah, I think, a big part of it goes back to that idea of the nervous system. And I think that, understanding that there's treatment options and there's now more treatment options than ever.
Yes.
And so, don't feel like it's something that you have to suffer with forever or that, just because you tried something and it didn't work, that there's not other options for you. So I think just understanding this is deeply ingrained in the nervous system and in the body, and that there's now kind of, more treatments than ever, to be able to help, regulate and change that nervous system so that we can help you feel better. And so even though you've suffered for a long time, that doesn't mean that it's not something that can change. And so I think, reach out and just keep trying and, we'll find something that will work for you.
Okay. So, Dr. Leake, this is a fun part. We do a quick fire round. This is more about you.
Okay.
And I'll just throw out a question to you and you answer it without much thinking. Just go with your first instinct. Okay? Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. First thing in the morning?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to start the day with coffee for sure. Yeah.
Can you drink coffee in the afternoon and sleep?
Until about 2 p.m. I found.
Yeah.
I've made that mistake for a while of like the 4 or 5 p.m. espresso. And then you're like, why am I awake?
Early mornings or late nights?
Late nights.
Late nights. One habit that helps your mental health?
Walks outside.
Walks outside. Best way to reset after a long day?
Think again, I'll say walks outside, but I also think sitting outside and breathing, I think helps.
Being outside, and breathing the fresh air. One word your patients would use to describe you?
Connected, I would hope.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. Something people would be surprised to learn about you.
I think people are often surprised to know that I also work on cars. I've restored a 1969 Alfa Romeo and work on old cars and particularly Alfa Romeos.
Oh, that's fun.
So fun.
We have a kind of a beat up old 1960 MGA, I believe, out there waiting to be restored.
Okay, I was kind of eyeing it as I walked in.
Oh,
trying to
did
figure
you?
out what it is. I saw the chrome bumper.
It's
and
an MGA 1960. That was when my husband was born.
Oh, man.
So he was super excited to get it.
Such a fun car. Yeah, such a fun car.
All right, Dr. Leake, thank you for being on the show. I always write a little jingle just for my guest. Here's yours.
In the noise and rush of everyday life, Derive Clinic helps bring calm through stress and strife. Mind and body, side by side, Dr. Leake helps you steady the ride.
Thank you for those beautiful words and jingle. I think that, there's just so much need to connection in this world. And so, spending time connecting with others is a wonderful way to do it. And I appreciate how you do that with this podcast.
Oh, thank you. I am a retired music teacher, so I had to do a little something musical. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you. It's so fun.
So for someone listening today who might be realizing, okay, I need to start paying attention to this part of my life, what would you say is the very first step to getting help?
Yeah, I think just, please reach out. Just trust that there's help and there's people here for you. I think, start with connecting with your friends and loved ones, maybe see what's worked for them. And I think that if, that's not enough, then, reach out to the therapist in the community. We have wonderful therapists and connection. And, feel free to use us as a resource. I mean, Derive Health, it's spelled like Derive, DERIVE, health.com. And even if we're not right for you, I think that, just reaching out and connecting and knowing that it will help you find, what will work for you.
Okay, and you are in Pinehurst.
We are in Pinehurst.
So all of us locals can just reach right out to Derive Health.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you say, derivehealth.com?
Yep, derivehealth.com, and it's spelled like Derive, so DERIVE health.com.
Okay. And we can make an appointment and the phone number and everything we need is on there.
Exactly, yeah. Call, text, reach out anyway. We'll be happy to help.
All right, that's perfect. This is one of those conversations that stays with you because mental health isn't something separate from your life. It is your life. It's how you show up, it's how you feel, it's how you connect with the people around you. So today I want to leave you with this. Thank you so much, Dr. Leake, for being here. I really appreciate you coming and sharing all this with us. And it was things that I'd never heard before. I learned a lot listening to you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, and thanks for letting us share. Yeah.
And I'm sure that you learned a lot as well. Imagine taking care of your mind the same way you take care of everything else in your life. Imagine the clarity, the calm, the strength that could come from that. And as always, keep imagining more.
Imagine more stories that soar, business, life, and so much more. Laughs, lessons, and local delight. It's the podcast that feels just right. It's the Imagine More podcast.